Hello and welcome back to INMR, where in today's podcast I'm going to be previewing the Champions League final between Borussia Dortmund and Real Madrid. On Saturday night, these two sides face off at Wembley to win Europe's biggest trophy. For Dortmund, they were definitely the underdogs in the semi-final, but they managed to beat PSG 1-0 in both legs, and Real Madrid completed a comeback against Bayern to reach the final and potentially earn their 15th Champions League title with a win this weekend. So what we're going to do today is have a look at both sides' tactical approaches, sort of how they're going to set up, and then similarities between both sides, and then we'll end on how Borussia Dortmund can exploit Real Madrid and how Real Madrid can exploit Borussia Dortmund. So we're going to start off with Dortmund's tactical approach. So his approach at Borussia Dortmund is characterised by versatile formations, strategic positioning and a focus on both attacking prowess and defensive solidity. In the low build-up phase, Terzic sets his side up in a 4-3-3 formation, featuring one defensive midfielder in the 6 role and 2 attacking midfielders in the number 8 roles. Dortmund often employ fast vertical long balls in this phase, positioning their attackers centrally to increase their chances of winning the first and second balls. For the high build-up, Terzic switches up and goes for a 3-back in a 3-2-5 formation, utilising 3 centre-backs, 2 holding midfielders and 5 attacking front players. This setup creates central numerical advantages and shorter distances between players, which allows for quick passes and smooth transitions. And maintaining that high defensive line that you can see on screen helps in counter-pressing and reduces space for the opposition if they do win the ball back. Dortmund are really good at exploiting the space, particularly from wide areas. They target the space between the opposition's centre-back and full-back with underlapping runs and overlaps as well. Central spaces are also exploited through well-timed through balls from midfielders or defenders to attacking midfielders who are making those forward runs. And in the final third, Dortmund often get 4 or 5 players into the box, creating overloads that force defensive errors. You'll frequently see them set up in 2v1 situations, especially on the weak side, to capitalise on long switches of play that leave the opposition fullbacks vulnerable. Players are strategically positioned outside the box to capture the second balls and cutbacks. This positioning allows them either to shoot or combine with other attackers to create better goal-scoring opportunities. In terms of Dortmund's defensive strategy, they employ different pressing systems depending on the phase of the game. In a high press, they'll play in a 4-1-3-2 formation and use man marking and focus on pressing the ball side fullback and midfielders while leaving the weak side fullback open. In a low press, they'll play a 4-1-4-1, setting up in a mid-block, aiming to stay compact, close to the centre and force the opposition out wide. The key defensive strategy for Dortmund is to squeeze the pitch by pressing the opposition centre-backs with central midfielders and pushing the entire team up. This forces the opponents further from Dortmund's goal, making it harder for them to create chances. Positioning many players centrally allows for quick recovery of the ball after losing possession, which enhances Dortmund's effectiveness in these defensive transitions. Terzic's side excels in counter-attacking football with a high tempo. They focus on spaces between the centre-backs and full-backs, as we've mentioned, and of course that central positioning during defensive phases enables more players to join the counter-attack and exploit the opponent's disorganisation. As you can see here, there's a 4v3 and you've got 2 players just behind Royce, I believe, who have been totally caught out there. Moving on to Real Madrid's tactical approach. In the low build-up phase, Carlo Ancelotti sets up in a 4-3-3 as well, and very similarly as 1 number 6 and 2 8s. These midfielders often drop and use the goalkeeper to create numerical superiorities, which allows them to beat the press. For high build-up, Ancelotti switches to a 2-3-5, usually pushing the fullbacks up and bringing the wingers inside. This setup allows 8 players to be in central areas and 1 on each wing, which creates way more options centrally and reduces space between players. Ancelotti prioritises playing through the middle, with 1 player high and wide to stretch the defensive line, while the rest create numerical advantages in that midfield area. This setup also helps defensive transitions by allowing more players to press immediately after losing the ball, shortening pass lengths and giving Real Madrid players much more control and time. A big part of Real Madrid's high build-up is maintaining a high back line, which aids in counter-pressing by positioning players closer to the centre. This makes it difficult for the opposition to recycle possession and reduces the time and space available to push up their defence. Real Madrid frequently targets attacking midfielders in the pockets between opposition's midfield and defence. Their numerical superiority in midfield usually ensures that at least 1 player is open to receive passes from the back or the wings, which creates confusion for defenders, enabling midfielders to turn and attack the defence with technical brilliance. You can see here that's Jude Bellingham. He's that midfielder free and he can just receive that on his back foot, and he's got plenty of time to either drive, look up and play a pass to players that will inevitably now be making that run. But yeah, this idea of having loads of people in the pockets is what allows them to have so much time in dangerous areas. In the final third, Real Madrid excel by attacking the spaces between the opposition centre-back and full-back, mainly through underlaps from midfielders. They also use overlaps to create 2v1 situations out wide. If the opposition full-back covers the overlapping run, the winger can cut inside and shoot or pass it to a midfielder. If the full-back covers the centre, the ball can be played to the overlapping player, creating a crossing opportunity. So they've really covered all bases with this approach. Real Madrid also don't shy away from using through balls to their quicker attackers, adding a dynamic element to their play. If the opposition maintain a high back line, Madrid exploit the space behind. If the back line drops, it opens space for Madrid's technical midfielders to control the play. Attacking midfielders and wingers make runs into the box, often creating overloads with 4 or 5 players. This forces the defending team to make decisions, often leaving some players unmarked. Ancelotti positions many players outside of the blocks for second balls and cutbacks. So as you can see here, the main option would be Valverde, just on the edge of the D. The reason that Ancelotti positions these players outside of the box is because it pushes the opposition's defence deeper, opening space in front of the back line for players like Bellingham and of course Valverde to shoot or combine with the attackers. Ancelotti values aggression without the ball, implementing a high-pressure system where Real Madrid often press man-to-man to regain possession quickly and maintain control of the game. In a low press, Madrid set up in a 4-5-1, focusing on a mid-block to close the centre and force the opposition out wide. They aim to squeeze the pitch, pushing up whenever the opponent makes a slow, sideways or backward pass, getting them further and further away from their goal, making it harder to create chances. An example of where this was really successful would be against Manchester City. They pretty much parked the bus, took it to penalties and won. To prevent the opposition from switching the play, Ancelotti positions the weaker side winger close to the weak side centre-back, blocking passes and positioning the winger for offensive transitions. Central positioning creates good conditions for defensive transitions, with many players close to the ball ready to regain possession immediately after losing it. This often allows Real Madrid to regain possession quickly and break. Madrid are also really good at counter-attacking with a high tempo, often targeting spaces between centre-backs and full-backs. Fast forwards like Vinicius Jr. and Rodrigo use their speed to attack the defence, and quite a lot of their goals this season have come from counter-attacking situations. So if we look at some of the tactical similarities between the two sides, we've got 3 here. So the first one is how they both adapt their formation quite well and like to dominate in the central areas. So both of them have those formations that can very easily switch. They both put a lot of importance on creating numerical advantages in the central midfield areas, which facilitates quick passing and maintain control of the game. Second similarity is the high defensive line and aggressive pressing when out of possession. Both teams like to maintain that high defensive line to support counter-pressing and compactness, while also implementing that high pressing strategy to regain possession as quickly as possible. Finally, they both like to exploit space and create offensive overloads. Both managers focus on the opposition's centre-back and full-backs. They also like them overloads in the final third to generate a lot of goal-scoring opportunities. So, there are 3 ways in which Dortmund can exploit Real Madrid. Of course, they are going to be the underdogs in this match, but these are 3 ways that they could potentially cause an upset. First of all, targeting the spaces behind the fullbacks. Real Madrid's fullbacks often push up high in Ancelotti's system, which means Dortmund can exploit the spaces left behind by sending their quick wingers or fullbacks on overlapping runs, aiming for through balls or long passes into these areas. Players like Karim Adeyemi could be particularly effective in this area. Secondly, Dortmund can press high and exploit transitions. Real Madrid like to build from the back and involve their goalkeeper in the play. With Dortmund's aggressive pressing, especially in that 4-1-3-2 formation, they can disrupt this build-up, win the ball high up the pitch and create immediate scoring opportunities before Real Madrid have set their defence. Finally, overloading central areas. Given Real Madrid's tendency to dominate central areas with a numerical advantage, Dortmund can counter this by overloading the midfield themselves, using quick and short passes to bypass Madrid's press. This could create space for Dortmund's attacking midfielders to exploit gaps in Madrid's defensive lines. So that's how Dortmund could do it. If we look at Real Madrid and how they could exploit Dortmund, they've also got 3 ways in which they can do it. First of all, exploiting the high defensive line. Dortmund's high defensive line can be very vulnerable against quick and direct balls over the top, and Real Madrid's pacey forwards like Vinicius and Rodrigo can exploit this by making lots of runs in behind the defence, using through balls from midfielders like Luka Modric and Toni Kroos. We saw Kroos in a previous match where he played that outside of the foot pass through to Vinicius Jr. Something as simple as that could be game-changing on the weekend. Secondly, they can utilise wing play and overlaps. Real Madrid can take advantage of the spaces on the wings, especially if Dortmund's wide players are pushing high up the pitch. By employing overlaps and creating 2v1 situations out wide, Madrid can stretch Dortmund's defence and deliver crosses and cutbacks to attackers arriving in the box. Finally, counter-pressing and quick transitions. Madrid can use their ability to counter-press effectively after losing the ball. Given Dortmund's focus on central play and short passes, Madrid's counter-press can disrupt their rhythm and win the ball back in dangerous areas, leading to quick transitions and exploiting any gaps left by Dortmund's offensive positioning. So the ways in which they can exploit each other are fairly similar, which I think just highlights how there aren't many differences in both managers' tactical approaches. I think it's going to be a really fast tempo match. I think it's going to be end-to-end football. But ultimately it's going to be based on, in my opinion, both sides' compactness in defence, because they both like to play this high line. It is risky football, so they need to be really solid in defence and not get caught out. Both sides have got very experienced players in defence, so it's going to be really interesting to see how the attacking side is going to try and exploit that, because if Real Madrid go for it, you've got Mats Hummels, who's been excellent in both semi-final legs. You've got Schlotterbeck, who's impressed as well. And Real Madrid, I think that whole defence is strong, but somebody I'd highlight in particular is Antonio Rudiger, who's been phenomenal, and we've very rarely seen him put a foot wrong this season, especially in the Champions League. That is where I'm going to end today's podcast, but there is plenty more you can go and watch. Last week I looked at 3 managers who could replace Roberto De Zerbi at Brighton, and also how Julian Lopetegui is going to set up at West Ham. For extra content, be sure to check out my website. Over there you can read match reports, analysis pieces, interviews and so much more. Just search INMRfootball.co.uk to access that, or you can click the link in the description. And if that's not enough, there is even more on both X and Instagram, so be sure to follow INMR on both of those platforms. Once again, the link will be in the description for those. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.